Greetings, dear friends. I'd like to begin this talk with paying homage to our teacher, the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammam sangham namasami. So welcome. The topic of the talk that I'd like to give today is transcendence. This was inspired last week. I was over in Ireland teaching a retreat, and we had meeting the folks who are managing and spending time at the monastery, the centre, Sunyata, over in County Clare in Ireland. I had a meeting the following morning, and one of the friends there read a poem by Hermann Hesse called Stages, and this inspired the title of this talk, Transcendence. And I may read the poem a bit later, we'll see. So what is transcendence? It comes from a Latin word, trans, and scandere. Scandere means to climb. Trans means to climb beyond, to climb out of, to open the horizons, to widen the view, to overcome, to shed old perspectives and embrace or open to new perspectives. So this is a word that has great relevance for us on the spiritual path, I feel. And in terms of the Buddha's teaching, this concept of transcendence is really, I would say, paradoxically paired with, integrated with immanence. These two seeming opposite ways of making spiritual progress, transcending, stepping away from, coming out of, moving towards something greater, and immanence, that which is grounding in what is, being present and opening to the way of it, the way it is, the reality. These two approaches, I feel, both have importance for us and complement one another. But today I'm going to focus more on the idea of transcendence, the idea of progress on the path of stepping forward and evolving, purifying the heart and mind. Because it's so what we experience when we practice, isn't it? And so to investigate and consider how this happens and the ways in which the Buddha encouraged us to transcend old habits, transcend narrow ways of being, transcend unskillful ways of being and thinking, and to incline toward nibbana, toward freedom from suffering, freedom from delusion. So I would say that every aspect of the Eightfold Path is an invitation to transcend, to let go of old ways and to move to a greater or more upright or more free, more evolved way of being. And so we can consider this in terms of the foundation of our practice, these aspects of path around action, speech, livelihood, sila, the virtue, the way of living the good life, the way of avoiding harm. And we often have to train ourselves to refine, don't we, our behavior and speech and ways of thinking in order to keep the precepts and to polish them, uphold them well. To uphold them well is to continually refine, see ways in which we can still further brighten our manifesting in this world through our speech, through our actions, and through our thoughts also, through our consciousness. And so we have the 5 precepts. So helpfully simple, this guidance. We just need to bear in mind these 5 guidelines: not to kill, not to steal, to avoid sexual misconduct, disrespectful or hurtful behavior in relationships, and to avoid lying, and to avoid intoxicants that make us careless and way more likely to fall into harm in these other 4 ways. So, young children need often to be helped to appreciate or to remember or to connect with this fundamental humanity that we're all capable of, to be harmless, to avoid hurting or harming one another or other beings. And so we learn, and often we can learn through making mistakes and feeling remorse and feeling the agitation, the suffering that comes from, a harsh comment, behaving in a way that's hurtful for others, or even falling into more serious ways of harming. And so we get to transcend, we get to refine our behavior, speech, and then as we consider ever more deeply how to live skillfully, how to be a source of safety in the world, how to be a source of help, a source of benefit, to bless the world with our conduct, with the ways in which we manifest around others, then we, as we continue to refine our speech and our actions, we can then start to turn and consider other path aspects around mental training, mindfulness, samadhi, stillness, right effort. So the Buddha's advice regarding right effort, this path factor, is an invitation to continually transcend our state that we find ourselves in. We find ourselves here because of the karma that has brought us to this experience right now. And it may be a mixed bag of good and ill, good and bad, wholesome and unwholesome energies. The energies are all energies of unfinished business, and they are playing out. And our work as practitioners is to be aware of this, be mindful of this, give the mindfulness on observing of our karmic stream priority, so we can see how we may have inclinations that are not so skillful, as well as inclinations that are skillful. The Buddha, in this beautiful sutta in Majjhima Nikaya number 19, called 2 kinds of thoughts, he speaks about this. It's almost like the image of the person with the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other, So our mental contents, the sankhara that flow on as a result of our karma, it's not really personal. The karmic forces that have led to this mind and body right here and now, there can be manifesting as wholesome and unwholesome inclinations, thoughts, experiences for us. This can especially be obvious when we're meditating, because when we're meditating, there's no outside stimulus, or very much less input, and so we get to notice how the mind will continue to feed. Rather than feeding on sense input, it will feed on past history. it will throw up thoughts from this karmic stream. So we'll have memories, ideas, inclinations coming up into the mind when we're on retreat or when we're meditating, and we get to observe them. And it's like the angel on the one side and the little devil on the other. So sometimes the thoughts will be skillful and wholesome, thoughts of renunciation, thoughts of love, compassion. And sometimes those thoughts will be other. They will be thoughts of harm, harmful, hateful, cruel thoughts, perhaps. It can be quite shocking what can arise in the mind when the mind is allowed some space to reveal the layers of sankhara that are there for us. There can be cruel thoughts. There can be thoughts of greed and acquisition, covetousness, and so forth. And confused and deluded thoughts, visions even. So there we have these two kinds of thoughts. And the Buddha, when he was still the Bodhisattva, before he became the Buddha, he observed this simple reality that there are thoughts that are wholesome and thoughts that are unwholesome. One could categorize thought into these two camps. You could say also there may be thoughts that are fairly neutral when we're obsessing about the shopping list or, what I'm going to have for lunch. Not so charged with liking and disliking, but actually with almost any thought we can tease out the greed that's there, the desire that's there, the aversion that's there, and see which camp it falls into, angelic or demonic, wholesome or unwholesome. And so the Buddha, as the Bodhisattva, before he became the Buddha rather, Siddhartha Gautama, he began to observe his thoughts in terms of these two categories. And what he recognized was, as we all can recognize, that unwholesome thoughts led to suffering. Really obviously, more suffering, more agitation in the mind. And so he said, just like a cow herder, a shepherd, in the monsoon, in the season when the crops are growing, needs to keep a very close watch on those animals. And perhaps with a stick, may need to keep prodding, tapping, directing them away from the crops so that they don't damage the growing crops. There has to be this constant vigilance. And so it is, the Buddha said, with less wholesome thoughts. We need to be very adept at noticing and redirecting, taking care of, being aware of, and not acting upon harmful thoughts, negative thoughts, confused, deluded thoughts. And the Buddha said also there are times when the thoughts we have are very wholesome, very upright, very kind, thoughts that are beneficial. And we can notice these thoughts and again recognize that there may be some seeds of suffering there. There may be some attachment. There may be some identification with those thoughts, for instance, just to be alert to the dukkha there. But it's a different kind of experience. We can feel the more soothing quality that these thoughts are not harmful. These thoughts are not hurtful. They're not going to lead us to doing anything that may go against the precepts, the moral guidelines given us by the Buddha, and that we hold in our hearts to be harmless in this world. So such thoughts may not be so dangerous. The Buddha said, just like the cow herder or the shepherd, at the time when the crops have been harvested, the end of the year, and the cattle can roam much more freely because there's no danger of them causing any harm to the growing crops. And so the shepherd can sit back, relax and allow them to roam more freely. Such thoughts are not going to create more trouble for us. And so this attitude, how to deal with the two kinds of thoughts, is something to consider. And we get to transcend this thinking process to polish it and refine it over time when we pay attention to thinking in this way. Because when we pay attention to the thoughts, they have a sort of flow to them, and we can have this directing quality of mindfulness that will quite naturally pare away harmful thoughts, unwholesome thoughts, and promote, allow more wholesome ways of thinking. Following on from Majjhima number 19, the two kinds of thoughts sutta, the next sutta is called Removal of Distracting Thoughts, number 20, Majjhima 20. And this goes further in helping us to transcend unwholesome patterns and ways of thinking, which, of course, in turn lead to unwholesome ways of behaving. So we're coming back to the source and we're transcending anything which may result in unfortunate, unskillful behavior. So the Buddha speaks about the kinds of thoughts that are distracting the mind, taking us away from the path, that are not beneficial for us, and how to deal with those thoughts. And he gave 5 methods. I'll see if I can remember them. Very simply, when we have unwholesome thoughts, the first thing we can do is to notice and redirect the mind towards something wholesome. So, if I'm having a thought that is tinged with hatred, with animosity towards anyone or anything, to notice that and to redirect that way of thinking. Perhaps to consider the person who I'm having this negative thought about. Can I remember their good qualities? Can I bring to mind the good that they've done and consider that instead? Or can I turn my attention to someone or something else that is wholesome and recognize this is a peaceful abiding? This is a good direction for the mind to rest in something wholesome and take inspiration from that. Can I turn my attention away, in short, from the unwholesome thoughts? Another way the Buddha said to deal with distracting thoughts in this sutta, he said to see the danger in them. Notice how they affect us here and now, but also their potential for an unfortunate direction in the future. So if we follow negative, harmful thinking, ways of thinking, we're much more likely, of course, aren't we, to move into actions that reflect that thinking and create problems for ourselves and others, or to say something from that place of negativity that will hurt or harm ourselves and others. So to see the danger, to sort of nip that way of thinking in the bud through a kind of revulsion. In another sutta, the Buddha said it's as if somebody's draped a corpse around your neck of an animal. When we see our unwholesome, negative ways of thinking in that way, there's a wish to throw off that horrible, disgusting experience, so we can remember, not only the painfulness that we're feeling now in relation to unskillful ways of thinking, but also where it takes us and how dangerous that can be, how perilous potentially following unwholesome ways of thinking can be. Another way the Buddha said is to just forget those thoughts, just put them aside. Easier said than done, I feel, personally, to just drop an unwholesome thought. But the other pieces of advice in this sutta are giving us ways in which we can do that. So just to forget those thoughts, the most important thing being that inclination, the willingness to let go, to step away from, to change the habits, the habitual ways of thinking, where they're harmful for us, where they're negative, complaining, criticizing, judging, and so forth, and to open to a different way, to transcend, in short, these unwholesome ways that we have, in a way, inherited, past karma. We don't have to continue in unfortunate ways, habits, conditioning. We can change that. We can transcend that. We can go beyond that. Another way to remove distracting thoughts from Sutta Majjhima number 20, the Buddha gave, is to trace them back. For me, this is the most interesting advice in this sutta, to trace back the thinking. It's like to go back in time to the source. Where did this come from? We can't necessarily do that through thinking. We can't necessarily know why I have this particular aversion, why I have this particular inclination that is harmful. Why do I really find myself disliking this person or situation? I don't really know. And if I try and think back and remember and figure out, I may manage to do that. But on the other hand, what we can do much more straightforwardly and accessibly is to come into the body and to feel what's happening when these thoughts arise, harmful thoughts, cruel thoughts. When these thoughts arise, what's happening in the body? And in this way, friends, we can trace back, come back to the roots of any kind of constellation that is unwholesome, any kind of past trauma, any kind of unfortunate, painful habits that we may have. Come back to the body and just to feel what's happening. How is it? What's happening in the chest, in the belly? How is the breath? What's happening in the throat, the jaw? And as we pay attention to the body, we're able to relax and let go of those energies that connect with those ways of thinking. And as we relax and let go of those energies in the body, those ways of thinking have ease. They are able to pass, to dissolve, to transform. And so we get to transcend unwholesome habits, unwholesome conditionings from who knows where, through this kind of investigation, tracing it back. And so all it takes is the interest, the awareness of what's happening. Oh my gosh, I'm assailed with really hateful thoughts at this point. I'm just really convinced that this is not right. This situation's not right. This person's not right. Is that true? And whether it's true or not, can I see how I'm suffering when I have unwholesome, unkind, uncharitable, even violent, even hateful thoughts? And can I feel what that does to this mind and body, how that impacts this mind and body, and really get interested in investigating the Dharma here? And when we investigate any phenomenon with mindful, wise attention, kind attention, with a heart that's inclining then towards stillness, towards peacefulness, we will enable transformation, transcendence to take place, because it's natural, because all things arise and pass, and we're stepping back from a relationship of grasping and reifying and making things last, kind of supporting habits and entrenching patterns of behavior. We're stepping back from all of that and then allowing the Dharma to do what it does, reality to do what it does, which is to flow. These energies will naturally dissolve, release, pass away. And so this investigation, this tracing back to the source, is a freeing up and a transcendence of habits, unwholesome or wholesome habits. And the fifth way the Buddha gave to remove distracting thoughts, to transcend unwholesome ways of thinking or entrenched patterns of thinking. He gave the last piece of advice, which is if all else fails, if all these other four methods, the methods of inclining to something else, to something wholesome, looking away, letting go, tracing back, and investigating in order to let go. If none of this works, the Buddha said, then we must clench our teeth and sit firm and apply all our energy to not allowing such thoughts to get a hold on us. So this energetic, forceful attitude, firm, determined attitude. I'm not going to, however strong and persistent and obsessive these thoughts are, any unwholesome thoughts, I'm not going to allow them to take a hold. I'm going to ride them out. I'm going to stay present until those thoughts are able to recede through this determined, wise attention. So to struggle, to be prepared to struggle with our unwholesome ways of thinking, with unwholesome habits, to be willing to change, to be willing to transcend, to extract ourselves from pain and suffering. We are so deluded quite often that we even hold on tightly to our suffering. And this is something to be very compassionate with. We can recognize that, yeah, this is suffering, but I still can't let go. I still want to continue in this way, even though I know it's painful, because I can't imagine anything else. I can't step into the unknown. It's too scary, perhaps, or too destabilizing. Who will I be without this pattern, this thought, this way of thinking? And so we have to be willing, friends, to let go and to transcend and to step into the unknown, because transcendence is surely that journey. And it's the letting go first, and only then do we get to appreciate good results. So this sense of willingness also comes in, the willingness to say goodbye to the old and open to the new, and to let our sense of identity and who we are and what we stand for and what we think about things, our views, our opinions, to be willing to question and open to the possibility that these things are not to be held to. These things are not permanent. Let's not allow ourselves to be defined by anything less than the goal of the spiritual path. Everything else has to go. So this requires then a constant letting go. And this effort, right effort, as I mentioned earlier, this path factor is such an invitation to be willing to transcend again and again our conditioning. Because in right effort, the Buddha said there's simply these four aspects. We're willing to let go of anything that's unwholesome that's present for us, and not to allow anything unwholesome that's not present to arise at any point in the future. Willingness to promote and allow, and just like allowing those cattle to graze freely at the end of the growing season, when the harvest has come in, we can allow wholesome thoughts to flourish, to freely express themselves. And we can allow anything that's wholesome, any qualities that are wholesome that haven't arisen, should they come into our consciousness, let's promote those qualities, bring them up. And all of this with an attitude of letting go. We don't want to hold on to the unwholesome. We also don't want to hold on to the wholesome. This letting go is the letting go of identification. But to enable a sort of channeling of our energy is to step away from the unwholesome and incline towards the wholesome. And then, you know, as we do the inner work, this inner work, our minds become more wholesomely engaged, less likely to immerse in unwholesome ways of thinking. And so our actions and our speech will reflect this, and we become a blessing to the world because we're harmless, we're safe. We are always going to incline towards the good for ourselves and for others, for all beings. So transcendence is like saddha, you know, this Buddhist quality of faith or confidence. It's a leaping into the unknown. It's a willingness to trust, you know, just as saddha, this quality, this friend on the path for us of confidence or faith in the Buddha's teachings, gives us the energy to be willing to let go of old ways, of old habits, of old ways of thinking and viewing the world, and to have the confidence, have the courage to put them aside and open to whatever comes next. You know, in the same way, transcendence is this climbing out of the past and opening to the future. We can only really live when we're letting go of habits, friends. When we live habitual lives, you know, it's just like a treadmill, isn't it? We're just repeating the same old, and there's no chance for, there's no opening, there's no opportunity to evolve spiritually. So to let go of habits, to work with the hindrances, work with the obstacles that we come across on the path. And, you know, it's worth focusing on the hindrances as another way in which we can practice transcendence, because we want to let go of the hindrances again and again. These five obstacles to spiritual progress. The Buddha gave us this beautiful paradigm. So whenever we're finding that we're in some way bogged down spiritually, we're not really making progress, we're not feeling a sense of movement in the right direction, the Buddha said there are just 5 reasons for this. There'll be some greed in the mind, some desire, or there'll be aversion. There'll be some energy imbalance. Either we'll be too slothful, lacking in energy, or we're over-energized, we're restless and agitated. And the 5th hindrance, as you know, I'm sure, is doubt, is questioning in an unhelpful way, is getting caught up in loops of thinking, is dwelling in confusion, when really all we have to do is let go of that, those patterns of thinking, and come back to meditation practice, come back to mindfulness, come back to body awareness, simplify, ground ourselves. So the remedy for doubt is just that. It's to, as in the Sutta Majjhima 20, to remove the distracting thoughts by taking the attention elsewhere. Consider the wholesome, consider the Buddha's teachings, consider the body. Come back to the body, come down from the head, Come into the heart, come into the base of the body, watch the breath. In this way, doubt is dispelled and we can make progress on the path. We can transcend doubt in this way. And then these energetic imbalances of sleepiness, lack of energy, unwillingness to put energy into our practice, and or restlessness, agitation, inability to settle. So we need to notice when these hindrances are present and to balance them out. Come back to the middle way. Where there's too little energy, bring up energy. Get up, walk about, do walking meditation, breathe deep, open the eyes, energize by taking in good Dharma, energize by simply noticing the lack of energy. That's the most important thing. And then the many ways in which we can bring up energy will come forward for us. And when there's a surfeit of energy, there's restlessness and agitation, to focus more, to consciously rein it in, bring the energy to one-pointedness, allow ourselves to focus on something simple, still, and bring our energy back to a more balanced middle way. And we get to feel this, we get to notice. And, it's very beautiful to pay attention to the energy right now and to see where on the spectrum it is and to apply, tweak, prod a little, just like the shepherd or the cattle driver, just prodding the cattle to keep them in the fold, to keep them away from danger. We can notice energy anytime we choose to and bring it to a balanced middle way. And so we can transcend energetic imbalances compassionately, with care, and allow ourselves then to come back to making progress on the path. And these other two hindrances of desire and aversion, first of all, again, it's noticing, being aware of these things. We can then apply the remedy and transcend them. So where there's desire, let's consider how things change. Impermanence, whatever we desire, the cup that's already broken, the object that's already decayed, gone, shattered, finished, the person who's aging, getting old, getting sick, will pass away. And then where will that object be? To begin to open our hearts to the reality that nothing can be grasped, nothing can be really enjoyed for more than a fleeting moment. And we can kiss the joy as it flies, but recognize that it's flying and not hold on to or try to change that reality. So for greed, for desire, for lust, the remedy is anicca sanya, bring in the perception of impermanence and transcend, let go of that greed and desire. And for aversion, ill will, of course, the remedy is loving kindness, metta, bhavana, to bring in kindness. Whatever I'm hating, whatever I'm finding fault with, whatever I'm wanting to get rid of, may I open the heart and wish myself well, wish those painful feelings well, those painful thoughts well. And in that way, we can then extend loving kindness even to the object of our hatred or negative judgment, and see all things equally sort of imbued with this warmth of loving kindness. And this is the remedy. And to bring in these remedies is a work, but it's a work that can be done. And when we are mindful enough and remember and bring them in, bring in the counterbalance, the ways of allowing energy, whatever kind of energy, of these hindrances to come to rest. When we do this, we're transcending all the obstacles to the spiritual path, and we can make progress, we can evolve, we can continue to step forward into the unknown. Say farewell to the known, friends. I think at this point I'd like to read this poem by Hermann Hesse. He was a very wonderful artist and poet and writer. He lived in the 20th century, died in 1962. He was German, half German and half French Swiss. And he wrote a book about the Buddha. He traveled to India. He wrote a book called Siddhartha Gautama. It's a very beautiful book. Many wise reflections within it that are from the Buddha's teachings. He also wrote a book called The Glass Bead Game. And in this book, he wrote this poem I'm going to read. He wrote it during the Second World War. So here it is. Let me see if I can share it with you. Please just relax and meditate and open your ears and hear these words from Hermann Hesse. The poem called Stages. As every flower fades, and as all youth departs, so life at every stage, so every virtue, so our grasp of truth blooms in its day and may not last forever. Since life may summon us at every age, be ready, heart, for parting, for new endeavour. Be ready bravely and without remorse to find new light that old ties cannot give. In all beginnings dwells a magic force for guarding us and helping us to live. Serenely let us move to distant places, and let no sentiments of home detain us. The cosmic spirit seeks not to restrain us, but lifts us stage by stage to wider places. If we accept a home of our own making, familiar habit makes for indolence. We must prepare for parting and leave taking, or else remain the slave of permanence. Even the hour of our death may send us speeding on to fresh and newer spaces, and life may summon us to newer races. So be it, heart. Bid farewell without end. So these are the beautiful words of someone who appreciated anicca, impermanence, its value, the value of opening to that, and the faith that enables spiritual progress, the endless partings, the willingness to keep opening to the unknown, to let go of home, to be a wanderer, to let go of habits, to free ourselves from old conditioning, and to incline inexorably toward Nibbana. Ayya. So thank you, friends, for your kind attention, and warm greetings to everyone who's present for the live stream today. Good morning, all of you. Thank you for your greetings in the chat. Wishing you all a good day also. And there's a question here from Hema. Thank you, Hema. When the aversion to a person appears, even if I tried, what if at that moment I still cannot find any good quality about that person? Yeah, Sometimes it's like that, for sure. Our ways of thinking and our, in a way, perceptions of others can be overwhelmingly sometimes positive or negative. And it's really hard to see around the edges of that when we're invested in a particular view. And there's reasons for that, and the reasons are valid, and we're dwelling in that. And so I can really appreciate your question, and I can really relate to it. Like, it's really hard to see anything good about a person when we're upset by them. They've done something, or we have some history that's very, in a way, we've come to feel predictable around another person. And this is, something that's really crucial for us in our practice, to consider these things and to investigate more deeply, because we create one another. We're doing it all the time. We remember people from past experiences, and then when they pop up and we see them again in the present moment, we will invest the present moment with all of these perceptions and memories. And it's so quick. We've created them. We know who they are. We've got them down. We can rely on them being that way. We can predict what they're going to do and say. But can we? Can we really? Do we really want to be able to know somebody fully in this kind of a way? How limiting, how narrow, how how impossible then for things to change. And so it's really helpful for us to have a question mark regarding any kind of attitude or perception around anyone, any sense of knowing the other whatsoever. Let's remember, we can't possibly know another person. What do we know of ourselves, after all? Even this one, who I'm with 24/7. Do I really know what's happening here? Can I really say, this is who I am? Not at all, isn't it? We're just experiencing a constant flow of dharmas, ever changing. And so we can't really fully know this one, because there isn't anything in actuality that holds together and has any lasting quality whatsoever. There's no permanence here. There's no predictability. It's all uncertain and changing. There's nothing I can point to and say, this is me, this is mine, this is myself. And so it is, of course, then with the other. There's just an impossibility to reify, to know, to get a handle on anything out there, including other people. And so to just take in this possibility of not sure in relation to the other person could be helpful. It may not be possible to dredge up a perception of wholesome qualities or positive attributes in another person when we're overwhelmed, we're full of animosity, dislike, negative judgments, even hatred for that person. But let's consider the deconstruction of that person, that person doesn't really exist. Ultimately, there is only a flow of energy that's happening, and that we can consider how helpful it can be to step away from creating one another, because we're not really allowing ourselves to see things clearly when we do that. When we have an idea of who another person is, we're no longer really present. We're living in a perception. And it, as the Buddha said, perceptions are like a mirage in the desert. We see them, they look real, but ultimately they can't be real. Perceptions are, by their very nature, fabricated. So we want to be able to let go endlessly, really, of any perceptions that arise in the mind. So have that question mark, I would say. just consider, is it really true? Do I really know that person? Does that person really exist in any kind of a continuous way? It seems like it. When I see them, I know who they are, I know what's happened, we have a relationship. But when I really consider the Buddha's teachings, can I let go of my ideas about that person? Can I loosen the hold on the perceptions I have around that person and just be willing to let those things dissolve? And can I, when I see that person, when I think about that person, can I open to a bigger picture, a broader possibility? Can there be change here? So that would be my response to your question, and I hope that can be helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Hema. She goes on to say, I think that eventually is their own karma, and what bad things they do will eventually reflect in their own life. Thank you. Thank you, Hema. I'm assuming you're a she, maybe you're a he or a they, but thank you. That's such a wonderful point. And I so appreciate that. So look, if something another person has said or done has harmed or hurt me, and I'm feeling that, they're behaving in an unskillful way and I'm really upset about it, can I, redirect my attention to consider the consequences for them? If they are hurting and harming others, how do they feel? What's happening for them, within them? How much suffering is there? And what is the result of that? How much more suffering for them? So we can bring in compassion in this way, bring in loving kindness, and befriend, that person in our hearts. All our enemies need to be befriended. We don't want to have any enemies. We don't want to have anyone that we dislike or disapprove of. It's okay to have wise discernment. I'm not saying that we're to ignore unwholesomeness, unwholesome behaviors when we come across them, of course not. But it's more like, what is the remedy for aversion in the heart? It's loving kindness. We want to bring in and soften the judgments and the harshness and the any aspect that may be there for us of animosity toward that person. And when we bring in loving kindness, and in this beautiful way that you've told us, Hema, bring in reflections on their karma and their situation. When we do these things and soften the heart, then of course we're letting go of our own suffering, but we're also enabling ourselves to relate kindly, compassionately, skillfully to the other, whatever they're like, however they behave. And it's not to try to, if someone's behaving really unskillfully, we have then a duty to try to help them to avoid that harm. We have that duty. We have the moral imperative to speak up when we see something harmful being done that could be, where we could intervene, where we could make a difference. But the most important thing is to come from a place of loving kindness and compassion. And this is our first work, to recognize animosity and negativity here and to make peace with that, allow that to fade, allow kindness to come to the fore, and then we may be able to offer something of value. Thank you, Hema. That's a great answer for your own question. Really appreciate both question and answer. We have a comment here from S. Thank you, S. S says, thank you for the wisdom. I've got experiential realization that when facing aversions, the mind of transcendence do feel better than the mind of revenge. Yeah, absolutely, S. Isn't it? We really get to make progress on the path through the realization of path, right? We get to know what is path and what is not. and that transcendence is moving us forward along the path, the shedding of the old and the opening to the new, essentially, the shedding of that which is suffering and the opening to the end of suffering. And how does that feel? And do we taste that freedom? Do we have that sense of some positive progress, sense of moving towards the goal? How delicious, how delightful, how uplifting that is, how encouraging that is. And then, yes, when we dwell in revenge, we're thinking about how we're going to get even and how we're going to actually harm the other person, cause them other person's suffering. There's a kind of, how to say, like a slight tinge of satisfaction that we can feel, right? Getting even. Injustice happens in this world. All around us, we can see gross injustice and so much wrong thinking, wrong doing. It's just everywhere we look. But we can also see that to try to fight injustice, to overcome injustice through adding harm into the mix, may provide a little moment of satisfaction, the rightness of rebalancing things, but actually that harm will come back and create more suffering, both for us, and we're throwing, of course, more suffering into the mix, endless trauma, endless cycles of suffering. And we see that in the world around us, that this is what happens. People naturally, in a way, want to fight injustice, but the only way to work with injustice is not to take revenge, but rather to feel the suffering of what has transpired, feel the suffering that's here, and then make peace with that. And in the making peace with that, or that process of making peace, compassion can arise, kindness can arise, and wisdom can arise. And when we operate with these qualities, then we will act in ways that are most likely to reduce the amount of harm in the field rather than adding fuel to the flames. And this is our work. We want to be peacemakers. We want to be harmless. And we want to care for the world as best we can, coming into action and speech, manifesting in the world through wisdom, through compassion, and through kindness. Yeah. Thank you, S. Okay, all time's very short, so I'll just zip through and try and give very short responses to your kind comments and contributions. Thank you again, Hema. Would it be helpful to think about non-self when being treated disrespectfully, like when someone insulted me, but there's no me, so they insulted no one? Yes, exactly so. That is such a helpful consideration. And, we can also help ourselves by paying more attention to how we feel than to our ideas about what's happening. So we hear the words, what's the impact? What's happening in the body? Because when we pay attention to what's actually happening, we don't really have time to be reactive. We're doing the important work, which is to be present. And when we're really present, it's very difficult to have a knee-jerk, harmful response, to be reactive, to be inflaming a situation. We're much more likely to have a wise response because we're grounded, we're centered, we're here. And when we're here, our essential goodness will always be available for us. Thank you, Hema. S says, it's so important to think about the reason why aversion appears, from the root of the mind. That is the cause of the aversion, which will lead to a better transcendence. Absolutely, yes. Just as in the Sutta Majjhima number 20, the removal of distracting thoughts, where the Buddha says, trace the thoughts back. Yeah, come to the root, come to the source. And sometimes we can do that, like through investigation, through therapies, even past life regressions. People have been able to see why in this life there are certain ways of behaving and thinking. They come from past causes. They can be discerned. Sometimes we can't pinpoint in that kind of mind way, that kind of intellectual or rational way, the causes of things and unpack them, but we can certainly come back to the body. And in this way, we get to the root of things because it's all here for us, friends. The library's here. The whole universe is to be found within the framework of this mind and body. So when we come into this body, we're also investigating this mind. And I would say at a deeper level, subconscious level, unconscious level, we can then uproot the causes without having to be able to describe them through speech and language, to rationalize them, but rather to deeply investigate them on the pre-verbal level, oftentimes. And we know when we've unearthed or we've uprooted some kind of pattern of reactivity, way of thinking, way of behaving. We can feel it. There's a release, a letting go. And we no longer then need to continue to behave in those ways or to respond in those ways. How amazing it is. And this is why these path factors of right mindfulness, right concentration, right effort are so important for us too. The mental training that enables us to transcend our conditioning. Thank you, S. And just see if there's anything else. Okay, very briefly. Thank you, Sid. Sid says, how should one deal with intrusive thoughts in meditation? Wonderful. This gives me the opportunity to again say, please consider, friends, having a look when you can as a follow-up to this conversation on transcendence. These two suttas I've mentioned, Majjhima 20 and Majjhima 19. Removal of distracting thoughts and two kinds of thought. In both suttas, the Buddha is giving us a very good training and guidance how to deal with these thinking minds. So how to deal with intrusive thoughts. So can I refer you to these two suttas? Thank you, Sid. And John says, a couple of comments. It seems like 80% of talk at my current job as a care worker is fueled by unwholesome intentions, i.e., escaping silence or trying to please others or myself in selfish ways. Yeah, thank you for this sharing, John. He goes on to say, do you have any advice for keeping right speech in such an environment? So I'm just looking back again, the kind of things, yeah, people are trying to get away from silence, please others or oneself in selfish ways. So much of our speech, yeah, thank you, John. So much of our speech is fueled by the hindrances, the defilements, wanting, not wanting, ignorance, confusion. This is the case. Until we're arahants, we can really use our speech as a way of investigating what's happening in the mind and body. And I don't know about you, but I can often find, I'll say something and then I have a sort of wince, ouch, where did that come from? Why did I say that? Something maybe a bit harmful, a bit mean, a bit judgmental, and I didn't know I was going to say that. It's out and it's showing me what's the state of mind here. So we can really investigate speech. And of course, we can investigate our own speech, listen to ourselves, reflect upon what's said and where's it come from. And we can also investigate the speech of others, and so much we can understand about their particular karmic predicament from the ways in which people speak. And so, as you say, one can observe speech and can see, the kinds of impulses that lead people to speak in certain ways, what's behind the speech, what's going on in that heart and mind, and with great compassion, like the speaking to avoid silence, great compassion for that. People who don't know silence, who can't appreciate it. Peace is an acquired taste. We don't necessarily appreciate it until we begin to really open to that possibility. And so, how many people, get to have silent retreats or to meditate even for a short time every day? How many people know that the benefits of such a practice, such an opportunity to be silent and still, and to start to develop on the path, to transcend the suffering, to transcend the unwholesome, to move toward the wholesome, and to move toward ever more letting go? How many people know that? And so speech is really, yes, a reflection of the mind, the heart, and we can listen to others, listen to ourselves, and compassionately investigate. And as we do this, of course, we're polishing our own speech, our own ways of expressing verbally, and having compassionate ear for the speech of others, and finding ways to use our speech and behavior to support and bless others and ourselves and all beings everywhere. So I'll finish here. Thank you very much, friends, for your kind attention. Let's close with 3 sadhus to our teacher, the Buddha. Sadhu, 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 anumodami.